Jai Guru Deva. Thank you for being in the waiting state of consciousness. The waiting state of consciousness is a state that I had to spend lots of time in while I waited for my master, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, with whom I trained for 25 years, sometimes coming to lectures on time, sometimes coming 3 hours, 4 hours late. But it was always worthwhile, and we'll try to make up for the wait and make it very worthwhile. Thank you for joining. Today, we're going to start with a little brush up on our technique of meditation and a quick reminder on proper practice. Very important with our practice of Vedic meditation to know normal. No K-N-O-W, no, normal. What is normal when you meditate? What's the normal experience? Because if we know normal, then we know if something is abnormal that might need some attention. So just a reminder of what it is we're supposed to be doing, practicing, experiencing. In aid of what are we actually closing our eyes and spending these minutes? We should be meditating about 20 minutes twice each day, although any amount of meditation, that is to say, whether you do it 20 minutes twice a day, or you end up doing it, 3 times a week or once a year, is better than doing nothing. 20 minutes twice a day brings maximum effect. And so when we sit for this practice of meditation, always we like to sit and have about half a minute or so of just letting the mind be easy. It's not a rocket countdown, so we're not doing like 30, 29, 20, etc. We're not trying to time the 30 seconds. It's just approximately half a minute or so. Let the mind settle. And if in that first half minute, the mantra pushes itself in, then it's already started effortlessly. There's nothing more for us to do, but simply to favor it innocently. If at some time, after half a minute, mantra hasn't yet started by itself, then we just pick it up. And picking up the mantra, we don't use great effort. It's a faint idea. No clear thinking, no clear pronunciation, a faint idea. Easy, effortless, taking it as it comes. Mantra may change in different ways, faster, slower, louder, softer, clearer, fainter. Its pronunciation may change, may lengthen, may shorten, may even distort, may not appear to change at all. In every case, we just take it as it comes. We don't anticipate change, we don't resist change, just simple innocence. And then as we're repeating the mantra innocently from inside, silently, we're allowing the mantra to fade, and it's going to fade. We're going to notice that the mantra spontaneously becomes softer, fainter, vaguer in the mind. And we're going to notice that there are other candidate thoughts waiting to move into that prime position. And we're perfectly all right with that happening. Anytime we feel that we're beginning to forget to repeat the mantra, then right away we do not try to persist in repeating it. We don't try to keep on remembering it. We let it go. And what will happen with that attitude is we're going to find that we move spontaneously into a little cascade of thoughts, one thought after the next. And it may be everyday stuff. This isn't done, and that's not done, and I have a crazy friend. I have to address this, whatever it is. And then at some point in that cascade of thoughts, the new thought comes. Oh, that's right. I'm meditating. I haven't been doing my mantra. Don't feel guilty. This was supposed to happen. Learning how to let go of the mantra is part of the art of Vedic meditation. Having that attitude in advance that if the mantra starts to disappear, I'm not going to try to hold on to it. I'm going to let it go. And why do we do this? We'll see in a moment. Bear with me. So the mind goes into some little cascade of thoughts, and then you realize I'm off the mantra. What do? Easily, effortlessly, and rather nonchalantly return to that faint pulsation of sound. It's mantra, after all, in the mind. It's like a sound in the mind. And again, we don't snap back to the mantra behaving as if, oh, something terribly wrong happened. I forgot to repeat it. No, you were supposed to forget to repeat it. So when you realize that you've forgotten, you succeeded in letting go. And that's the first letting go. Very good. Now return to it. Take it as it comes. And how many times should it repeat? However many times spontaneously it stays there. As long as we're not using effort, we're doing it correctly. And once again, the mind starts to lose the mantra. And in all of this, we're settling down, settling down, settling down into those subtler states of the thinking process. Each time we lose the mantra and we end up in a realm of thought, and then we return to the mantra innocently, the mantra gets softer and fainter. This whole process is beginning to become increasingly charming. And so that increasing charm is what draws the mind inward, because our mind is structured in such a way that always our mind will move effortlessly in the direction of greater happiness. And so then that movement towards the subtle is the movement toward greater and greater happiness. We may experience that sometimes mantra becomes so faint that it's almost imperceptible. Just some faint pulsation there. And then we just innocently allow it to disappear. And we may have a moment where mantra disappears and no thought replaces it. And in that moment, that is the state of being, pure consciousness, pure awareness. So many names for that state. When we're awake inside for a moment and no thoughts are dominating or defining our consciousness. Consciousness there is standing alone. For however long that lasts, 1 second or 10 minutes, doesn't matter, because it's a timeless experience. It makes a deep impression in our consciousness, makes a deep impression in the mind. And so that unboundedness, that moment of unboundedness, is the revelation of our true nature, our true self. Capital S, self, is that. And then, of course, you might have a thought, oh, here I am. But if you're thinking, here I am, you're not there anymore. Now you're thinking about being. And so that's all right. You just came out of the state. So now what do? Innocently, easily, effortlessly return to that faint pulsation of mantra. And once again, if you feel you're losing it, don't try to hold on, let it go. It's delivering you to that deep inner silence. And that silence is bliss. It must be bliss because our mind, when awake and capable of thinking, always would start thinking of something better than where we are in order to arrange that new experience. But in this case, our mind is awake and capable of thinking, but for a moment, it chooses not to think. The implication of this is that the mind must be in a supreme inner contented state. And when our mind touches that state, even for an instant, then our brain begins to produce a cocktail of bliss chemicals. These are the chemicals that instruct the body to become adaptive, to stay and play, to let go of the fighting and fleeing, to interact in a way that is evolutionary with the demands of the time. And so we exit our 20 minutes of meditation with completely renewed brain chemistry and body chemistry. Body chemistry and brain chemistry have been altered utterly as a result of our innocent little practice of meditation. And this is going to give you the capacity to have the negative effects, the injuries caused by overloads of experience of the past. Those injuries are healed and removed. And this puts you in a position where, with full memory of the past, it's not that when you release a stress, you don't release all memory. You still have memory, but you don't have the injury in the body that went with the memory. That's the stress. I'm running a course on this for those of you who already know about it, you know that for Australia and New Zealand, next Saturday it will start. For those in the Americas and Europe, that's going to be on your Friday. If you want to register for that course, you can wait for an email to appear, which is going to come after this talk today, and you can register for that course where we're going to learn all about what is the difference between stress and memory, and what is the relationship between stress and memory, and how can we transcend the stress aspect and still retain memory so that we have a lively capability to move forward in life with perspective. This is going to be in a few days' time. But today, the thing before us is just to get our meditation done and have a meditation that's effective. And effective meditation always is an effortless meditation. Effortless equals effective. Sometimes when we're meditating, because our body's resting so deeply, our body starts to unstress. And the unstressing in the body, the removal of stress and the dissolution of stress chemistry in the body is a very important part of our practice. When we start unstressing while we're meditating, sometimes the stress release has a slightly provocative effect on the brain. This excitatory effect of unwinding the stresses can make the brain get a little stimulated. And this may pull us away from the mantra and pull us away from those deep inner states and bring us up to the conscious thinking level again. And in meditation, when this happens, this outward stroke occurs, we take it as it comes. It's not a sign that you have somehow forgotten how to meditate. Not every aspect of benefit in this meditation comes from being deep. Sometimes we need to unstress our stresses. And so even correctly practiced, our meditation, effortlessly practiced, may bring about a tendency for an outward stroke. Some little wave of thoughts comes, or maybe some little wave of emotion comes, or some wave of body sensations comes. And these things are the artifacts of a positive good happening. And so when we discover that we've been drawn back to the surface, we just return to the mantra effortlessly and let everything settle down again. And the next level of stress will be released. And through this process, we're peeling away layer after layer of old, now irrelevant injury, reactivity in the body that doesn't serve a purpose anymore, and bringing our physiology into the program of our mind's more illuminated state. So we'll meditate now, and when we practice our meditation, we want to be sure that we have our back supported, if that's possible. I have no idea where all of you are watching this from. I mean, you might be looking at your telephone sitting in a forest somewhere, or maybe you're venturing into listening to all of this while driving your car. If so, take the nearest exit and pull over to a safe spot, because it won't be good to be listening to this meditation instruction while you're driving. Wherever else you are, see if you can find a little comfortable position. Good always to have the back supported. And then we sit easily and comfortably. So let's do that now. We're sitting easily and comfortably. Let's close our eyes. Let the mind be easy. And what we do is we don't try to do much. Sitting for half a minute easily, and then picking up the mantra just as a faint idea and taking it as it comes. Absolutely no anticipation, no expectation of any result. And don't mind the time. I'm minding the time for us. Jai Guru Deva. All right, keep the eyes closed. Let go of the mantra from inside. And now we'll have about 2 minutes just letting the mind be easy, taking it as it comes. I'll let you know when the 2 minutes is up, and then we can open our eyes slowly and come out. And now we may open our eyes slowly. Very good. You experienced how easy it is. It's easy and simple. This is just the normal, natural process of thinking the mantra and taking it as it comes. This is how we should meditate easily, morning and evening. One thing is very important, that we do not try to meditate. We do not try to keep the tempo of the mantra the same, nor do we try to change the tempo. And we do not concentrate against thoughts we might have or against noises we might hear. We do not resist thoughts. We do not resist noise. We do not resist the mantra changing or disappearing. We talked about that. We do not resist anything. We take it as it comes. It is a very simple, natural, innocent process. When you meditate on your own, it's good to start with half a minute, as we said, sitting quietly. That means close the eyes about half a minute and then start the mantra innocently, silently from inside. And when you want to end meditation, then stop thinking the mantra from inside, but do not open the eyes for about 2 minutes. And this is very important, that we start with half a minute of silence and end with 2 minutes of silence. All right, now I have some time for questions that people have sent in and would like to have answered. Some of these are what we call topical. Some of them are more general. So I'll rely on Rachel, who is here with me assisting, to bring some of these questions to me, and we can start answering some of them.
Thanks, Thom. So we're going to dive right in with what may be top of mind for a lot of people. We received quite a few questions about George Floyd and some of the riots that are going on. And so what our community is wondering is, what responsibility do we have as meditators in what seems to be days of civil unrest? How do we effectively express outrage we might be feeling? And how do we encourage change that we might be desiring? On top of that, how do we possibly interpret the actions of humans that may cause untold suffering to others as evolutionary?
See, the thing is, evolution is inexorable. That means uncompromising. That means it's happening all of the time. And for this, in order to gain perspective, we have to use an analogy, which was one of my favorites used by my master, Maharishi. You have a dark room, and there are lots of people in the room. And in that room, because it's dark, people are banging their knees on the furniture, hurting themselves, falling down. They can't recognize each other. The Committee on Darkness convenes and says, we have to solve the problem of darkness. And so how do we solve it? And somebody says, you know, let's see if we can push the darkness out the window. Somebody says we need to be more practical than that. Let's get first aid kits because people are hurting themselves on the furniture. Other people are saying, you know, in order to identify each other, we need to have specially manufactured Braille badges so that we can tell who's who in the room. And then somebody else in the group says, look, I have a better idea. Let's just change our attitude about the darkness. And let's have a new motto, darkness is beautiful. You know, don't ever expect to live not in darkness. You should live in darkness and enjoy it. And in all of these, somebody walks into the room and switches on the light. And a few things happen when you introduce the second element, the element of light. First of all, the previous attempts at the solution no longer are relevant. You're not going to need to rearrange and engineer the furniture so that people don't hit it, because light brings that capacity of contact between the knower and the known. You're not going to need first aid kits. You're not going to need the badges. You're not going to need the new motto. There may be some people who want the lights to go off again because they want their old, you know, solution to the problem to be tried out. And now it can't be tried out because the problem disappeared. Now, the next thing that happens when the light goes on means, in this analogy, consciousness grows. Expansion of consciousness has occurred. When consciousness expands and consciousness grows, we also get to see, not only can we use the consciousness we have, but we get to see what a mess has been created in that room. The room is a complete mess. And then one of the first things we have to do is start cleaning up the mess that had been created during the darkness. Now, we hold that an age of enlightenment has begun. Long time ago, actually, back in mid-70s. It is, from the Vedic perspective, astrologically, and even from the rational perspective, logically, that a new degree of human consciousness has dawned on the earth. With that comes greater knowledge, including greater reportage. That is to say, you know, you now get to hear about atrocities. And atrocities absolutely are everywhere all the time. If I cast my awareness over the whole little blue ball planet that we're sitting on, spinning around a yellow sun, atrocities in Cape Town, atrocities in Nigeria, children in the south of the United States being brought into police stations because parents have been putting out their cigarette butts on the children's bodies. Atrocities. It's not just about racism. It is about racism, not just that though. It's about the capacity of human beings to brutalize one another. I guarantee you that in the last few days, without it being reported upon, there have been horrible violations from one human to the next in prisons. There have been horrible violations and brutality from police to Black people in Redfern and Sydney. There have been horrible, brutal beatings of wives by brutal husbands everywhere from Perth to New York City, including by people who have reputations of being highly responsible citizens. What we're experiencing today is what got reported on. And it's good that now we have a little bit greater reportage. But let's be very clear about something. It is incumbent on us, where we can, as we become more conscious in this desire of ours to clean up the mess, we do need to be able to act locally, but think globally. Don't imagine for a moment that if 4 policemen are brought to justice, that brutality is suddenly going to stop. Don't think for a moment that if justice is brought to yet another policeman somewhere, that brutality is going to stop. Don't think for a moment that if some man is incarcerated for beating a woman nearly to death, or that people are incarcerated for child brutality, child pornography, baby pornography, for goodness sake, that everything's just going to stop because we incarcerated people. There is and has been, and it hasn't started recently, it's always been here. There has been a history of human beings behaving absolutely brutally to other human beings. Now, knowledge is for action. What are you personally going to be doing about it right now? Are you going to suffer from the imagination that something that you read or heard in the news about a localized, one of the hundreds of thousands of brutal acts that have occurred in the last 24 hours, that you're going to allow your whole attention to just go on that one place? If you feel as though through your actions some local corrective behavior can occur, yes, of course. The mind moves in the direction of greater charm. If you find that to be the direction in which you need to move, then move in that direction. Don't resist it. This is nature and evolution commanding you to go into action where you can. But if you find yourself incapable of acting, or you're somewhere where nothing that you do is going to make any difference to that one situation, start thinking globally. How can we bring about change at a global level where human beings stop behaving with such vulgar brutality toward each other? How can we stop that? It's not just racism. It's also racism, of course. It's not just racism. It's every kind of ism that we could imagine humans engaging in. How can we bring this to an end? Well, did you have any aggressive and negative thoughts recently? Did you put any of those thoughts into action, even mildly? Did you behave in even a passively aggressive way towards somebody else? Or think a negative thought? Maybe you didn't burst into action. Maybe you didn't. You did. To what extent do we need to bring our awareness first onto the self? We have first to come onto self. Let's be sure that our own individual behavior is expunged of all of the most terrible thoughts, because thoughts also are violence. Thoughts also are violence. And the most terrible actions. And then once we're certain about having brought a greater degree of purity to ourself, and this we can do by meditating twice every day. If we've been skipping meditations, we've been opting for the violent effect of accumulation of stress. Accumulation of stress is ultimately the thing that causes people to behave horribly to other people. Accumulation of stress. It blinds people. It turns people more into the bestial level. We see in the animal kingdom, we see certain species perfectly content with killing their own offspring or killing the offspring of someone who is a competitor of them. We're human beings. We're supposed to be able to rise above this kind of thing. Why aren't we doing it? It's because although we're gifted with a massive brain of billions of neurons, on average, we're using about 2% of our available brain's computing power. Consequently, we can conceive of very retrograde behaviors if we have enough accumulated stress. And then we blame it on the stress. I can't help it. I behaved this way because of what? My addictions, my upbringing, my background, my this, my that. Really, what we need to do is stop looking for blame for our own behavior and stop looking for the idea that, oh, we'll correct these men who did this violence and have them in an institution somewhere for the rest of their lives or put them in the electric chair, and then it'll all stop. It will not stop. You know, we've never been able to stop terrible behavior between humans by killing other humans who did it. In the last century, 20th century, we collectively killed 160 million people. 160 million. And each of the sides in that big argument that was World War I, World War II, and all the other little hot wars, everybody was convinced that they were in the right. Everyone was convinced that they were in the right. And so then nobody went out and did all this killing thinking that, oh, I'm doing this and I'm in the wrong. They all convinced themselves that they were doing something righteous. 160 million people were killed. Did that change anything? We're still terrified all the time, collectively and individually. What we have to do, starting with ourselves, is be sure that on a daily basis, we are rising into cosmic consciousness. Cosmic consciousness is that state where all accumulated stress has been eliminated. I'm going to be talking about this in great detail in the next few days, in a week's time when we have our course. But for the moment, when we have peeled away all of the stresses that drag us into behaviors that don't serve our interests and don't serve our intentions and do not serve the interests of evolution, it's because of accumulated stress. So we have to be sure that we practice our meditation twice a day and begin to become an ideal person, and then do what we can as an ideal person to help clean up the mess. Yes, do that. But sitting around being outraged is actually not an effective action. I was once traveling with my master Maharishi, and two other boys were traveling with me. We were all boys. We were under the age of 23. I think I was the youngest. I was about 21. And we were all in this seat behind him in the airplane, complaining about the state of the world, this, that, the wars, the people, the politicians, and all of that. And I didn't realize that he was in the seat ahead of us, eavesdropping. And at one point, he kind of waved his hand like this to come up. I went up there. I thought maybe he wanted some water or something. He said, "What is the conclusion?" I said, well, the conclusion is, this is the world we live in. He said, no, this is the world that you have to change. And what are you personally doing about it right now? Besides all that talking, what are you doing? I said, me? He said, is there anyone else listening? I said, no. He said, get some paper and pencils. We have another 5 hours of the flight. The three of you can sit back there and write an essay, each of you. This is the world. I've identified all of the opportunities for change. And this is what I'm personally doing about it right now. Go, start writing. And the three of us wrote and wrote and wrote. I think I wrote about 10 pages. And at the end of it, when the plane landed, Maharishi stood up. I got up, I had all the papers collected. I said, Maharishi, here's all the things we wrote. He said, yes, good, keep that, study it, and do all of that. So we have to actually be effective. Being outraged has its place. It has its place, but knowledge is for action. What is the action you're bringing? Act locally wherever you can. Don't forget to think globally. Atrocities didn't start in the last week. Atrocities will not be going away if this current set of atrocities, highlighted by the media appropriately, ends up having, corrective social behavior and justice. Bringing people to justice, always important. Don't think for a moment it's going to stop future atrocities. What's going to stop that? Sufficient numbers of people learning how to release their stress on a daily basis. This is what we're into. This is our message for the world. Start with yourself and let that thing spread to as many others as you can get interested in this thing. This is our message. Yes.
Thank you, Thom G. Speaking of stress release, we've got a few meditators who are curious about the experience of stress release, and they're wondering if the release of a very deep past stress can be felt physically for an extended period of time, even months or years, outside of meditation.
It's a very good question, and the answer is yes. If our consciousness continues to maintain the habit of choosing to be small. If our consciousness maintains the habit of choosing to be small, it's a question of, we can meditate, we can release the stress completely. The stress could be completely released, but the memory is still there in the cells of having had some overload of experience. If we make a choice, even as meditators, we have very powerful consciousness. We make a choice to stay small in our awareness. Then we can turn that set of physiological memories back into the stress that it once was. We can climb back down into those sharp boundaries. This is exactly what I'm going to be talking about and teaching techniques to avoid doing in our course that's coming up. That we have an opportunity to keep our consciousness big. Once our consciousness has that, we have those moments of unboundedness in meditation, we should be able to learn from this how to keep our awareness big. Big consciousness means big perspective. Small consciousness, small perspective. And, sense of identity, small, then, there's a small continuation of reacting to physiological memory as if it is the defining thing in my life. And in our promotion of this course that's coming up, we said, why is it that one person could go through dramatic, extremely stressful, extremely on any scale, magnitude of stress, very, very high, and yet come out of that and come through that and lead a life that's balanced and integrated, where someone else could have the same level of magnitude of stress reactivity in their life, and they're defeated for the rest of their life by it. Why is it there's a difference between those two people? What is that? We're going to talk about that in great depth. It's not about what happened to you. It's about what consciousness state do you choose to favor in your life? What consciousness state do you choose to favor? And we'll dive into this in great detail. But yes, a stress could begin unwinding during meditation, and it could even complete unwinding, and you could be completely free of it, but then you make your consciousness get small again, and once again that memory in the cells returns, and stress chemicals are built all around it and turn it into, yet again, another one of those defining characteristics that keeps you small. We should be able to release our stress and rise above it and stay out of it. And as meditators, it's incumbent on us to do everything we can to learn how to do that. But you can do it. You can do it. Yes.
Why is it that some of us seem to be confronted with our own resistance, even when we're committed to a regular meditation practice and continued knowledge study? what's the best way for us to move through this resistance?
We have to realize that resistance is caused by bad habits of thinking. You know, when you've been indoctrinated your whole life to think a particular way about yourself, and you have this self-definition that you have subscribed to the extent that you subscribe to that, and to the extent that you are unwilling to challenge assumption about bad habits of thinking, the most prominent amongst all of these is that everything that I'm experiencing is someone else's fault. If somehow I'm experiencing a life of consciousness that is not full, who is to blame for that? It's not me. You know, if everybody in the world had simply behaved ideally throughout my entire life, then I wouldn't be the way I am. And so I'm a victim of the behaviors of others. I'm a victim of that. And so, you know, subscribing to that point of view, and subscribing to the point of view that, you know, you are a wounded creature having been wounded by others. And, you know, based on this, you've built a kind of style of thinking and a habit of thinking. The habit of thinking, I'm only this because of those things. And anybody would be. Well, really? No. There have been many people who've had experiences, the magnitude of which has been far worse than yours. And yet, there they are, rising into higher effectiveness. That young woman, Malala, who was shot through the head by Taliban on a bus because she had been warned as a teenager to stop speaking out against the extreme belief systems that were prevalent around that women shouldn't be educated or be learning how to read. And eventually a group of people entered the conveyance and put a gun to her head and pulled the trigger. And she survived it. Not only did she survive it, she ended up a few years later giving one of the most inspiring addresses at the United Nations. Did you have a bullet go through your head recently? If not, I'm going to put it to you that you probably haven't had a magnitude of negative experience that that young woman had. And yet she was able to rise above that. And so then, you know, let's learn how to break the habit of thinking small about ourselves. Our meditation does awaken that unbounded awareness, but we can get into the habit of ignoring what our meditation is doing for us. And we can get into the habit not only of ignoring it, we can be inadvertently resisting the evolutionary expansion that our meditation is bringing to us every day. Inadvertently resisting it. How do we break these habits? We need more knowledge. We need alternative habits. We need to be presented with alternative ways of thinking about situations. And all of the knowledge that I've recorded, Exploring the Veda, which is a course that you can take by talking to your local Vedic meditation teacher. The next course beyond it, which is Mastering the Siddhis, which is to awaken inside of you the extraordinary human capabilities. The various recorded programs and podcasts that I have for free that are out there, many, many hours, 30, 40, 50 hours of me talking on a variety of subjects that you can just go into your little phone and click on podcasts and look up the Vedic worldview, and you can spend hours listening to and re-listening to alternative ways of thinking that break the habit of those old styles of thinking that bring you back into the small, you know, that which is convinced that you're only a product of what other people have made you. And so then we need to rise above this. And that means we have to take, you know, we do tend to take a very concerted and disciplined approach to maintaining small consciousness, small and wounded consciousness. And so if that's the habit, then we need to break that habit by taking just as disciplined and just as concerted an approach to letting go of those habits and replacing them with different kinds of thinking habits. And, you know, meditation on its own, practiced twice a day, will bring to us whatever we need, meaning it's going to awaken in us what it is that's missing. And so your meditation is, you're to be congratulated for your question, because your meditation is forcing you to ask the question, which is a very, very good question, by the way, of how can I change my thinking habits.
And we're going to move from thinking habits to a question about behavioral habits. We have a meditator who says, I meditate twice every day, usually for 20 minutes and with an empty stomach and not on any substances like coffee or pot, but I do smoke weed every day, and I would like to quit that in order to be a more functional human. I've managed to quit before, yet I'm finding it difficult to stop myself from repeatedly falling back into a pot smoking addiction. How do you recommend to someone like myself that I face this inner conflict and deal with an unhealthy habit or addiction?
If we have anything that we think is an addiction, anything that we think is an addiction, we need not to try to white knuckle it. You know, white knuckle, like you grab the steering wheel of the car and grab it so hard that your knuckles are white. You know, trying to white knuckle it, meaning trying to get rid of a thing all on your own. The fact is, you can't do it. It's not possible for you to beat an addiction on your own, because you're up against forces of nature that are bigger than you. Every kind of drug, and I know some people call weed the medicine, any kind of medicine is a consciousness that is bigger than the human. It's bigger than the human. And to defy that consciousness and say, I'm not going to participate with you anymore, and that big consciousness is just going to say, oh, you think so, huh? And so what do? We need to avail ourselves of those systems and approaches that have already shown to have worldwide success, those 12-step programs, as they're called, where people meet regularly and help with not just the fellowship, but also the techniques of rising above and deriving from your higher power. Your meditation shows you that higher power. For those of you who understand the 12-step programs, meditation is step 11. It's to have the experience of that vast unbounded consciousness. Whatever you conceive your higher power to be, there has to be something higher than simply you and your relationship with a particular substance. Or not just a substance, because behaviors can be addictive too. So an addictive behavior, don't try to do it on your own. It's not necessary. Seek assistance from those who have also come through this and who have arrived at a state of liberating themselves. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The methodology for coming off of some addiction, and you've defined weed as your addiction, coming off of some addiction, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This has been done many, many times before, very, very successfully. And so let's draw from the greater wisdom and knowledge of people who have had a larger number of experiences of this than we've had. And meditation will be part of it. You're to be congratulated on being such a regular meditator. The lights have gone on. Now you've seen that there's still some mess in the room with the lights on. Clean up that mess.
Sometimes there are specific people that I just can't deal with. I feel like I'm usually very calm and avoid unnecessary drama or conflict in my life, but there are just some people that push me to my edge. Why is this? Do they have some kind of power over me? And why is it that I just can't get along or deal with it? In my specific case, it's not someone I can just avoid. They are stuck in my life for a very long time. So how do I deal with it?
You know, the thing is, if you end up in jail, I used to work teaching meditations in prisons and jails all over the world. And now those programs are being extended by one or two of my teachers who are my colleagues, and I'm so happy to see that happening. Inside the system, when you end up, being incarcerated, the best way to make sure that you get an early parole is to be a model prisoner. Now, this thing of you have some family member or something sounds like a family member, or if it's not a family member, then somehow you're forced by some other bizarre circumstances to have to be entangled with somebody whose way of thinking about many things is contrary to your own way of thinking and behaving about those same things. And you find yourself in this situation. It's kind of like being in jail. If you become a ranting, railing jailbird, shaking the cage and shaking the bars and shouting and carrying on about it, you end up staying in the jail for longer. If you want an early parole, you have to learn how to be a model prisoner. And that means there's something that you have to learn from this karma. This is your karma. Karma means something that is causing you to have a restriction on the liberty of behavior that normally you should have. You have to learn from it. And if we're not learning from a thing, what happens is the thing repeats and repeats and repeats. Anytime we find repetitious, undesirable behavior in our life, it means we're not learning. And so what is it you have to learn? First of all, nobody is in charge of what you're experiencing except you. No one is in charge of what you're experiencing except you. And if you are finding that people are in charge of what you're experiencing, you are giving them that power. That is you giving that power to them. And so you're allowing them to behave in their behavior, which you can't do anything about because it's coming from their state of consciousness. And one thing we know, you cannot stop someone from behaving according to their level of consciousness. Someone's state of consciousness absolutely dictates their behavior, including you. What state of consciousness do you find yourself in? Are you able really to take a lesson from these demands that are being made on you, and can you interact with them more effectively? If you cannot, if you decide you can't, and if you decide that it is the actions and behaviors of others that are forcing you to have discomfort, then you're buying into an idea that actually is not real. And so, once again, my previous answer, study more of what it is I've been teaching. Dive into it more deeply, even more deeply. However deeply you've dived into it, dive into it more deeply. And if none of that works, come away and let me train you to be an initiator of Vedic meditation. And then you wield the weapon of the illumination. You can gently draw in whoever it is that is this annoying person and get them meditating so that their behavior begins to change in some good, productive, and resolute way. But meanwhile, don't rail against it. Somehow you designed this experience. Somehow you designed it. And now you need to deal with the situation that you're confronted with. Compassion will go a long way. And compassion and empathy. What is it that makes this person tick? That is to say, what does it feel like to be them? When you're in an interaction with them, what does it feel like to be them? And until you've asked that question and answered it effectively, you haven't done empathy. And without empathy, you cannot build any bridge to that person which has any kind of behavior altering effect. And the other thing, of course, is maybe you're just a little bit touchy. And that really, somebody's behavior is getting to you in ways that another person sitting in the room wouldn't be able to see exactly why it's getting to you so much. You've made yourself this way. All right. So all of those things, contemplate all of that. There's an opportunity to review and re-listen to this recording as I understand it. And so go back and play it back to yourself several times until you get it.
We also wanted to let everybody know that we're scheduled to end at 4:30, but if it's okay with you, Thom, we will.
4:30 means 4:30 this time where I am here.
Yes.
On the North Pole or wherever I am.
We started a bit late, and so we thought we would go a few more questions.
We'll go a few more questions, and anybody who wants to race off to the movies can do it. Yeah.
So the next question that just came in was about the interplay between charm and actual possibility in the current situation that we find ourselves in. So there's a meditator who said, I can feel charm towards the idea of hopping over to the south of France, but it's not possible. So, can you speak about charm and following charm kind of in the current situation that we're in?
When we have a spontaneous preference that bubbles up inside of us, and we are a regular twice daily practitioner of Vedic meditation, very important for me to emphasize that. I don't advise that, heroin addicts who don't meditate follow charm. I don't advise that, dictators who are in the business of brutalizing people for their own personal gain so that they can get a better yacht follow charm. If you practice meditation regularly twice a day, then your mind regularly twice a day is in contact with that least excited state, which is the home of all the laws of nature, which is the source of evolution. And then what will begin happening is spontaneously, you'll get impulses of desire that if you move in the direction of those impulses of desire, then you are moving in the direction of evolution, so long as the desirability continues. And we don't want rigid attachment. Something that was really desirable yesterday, maybe I wanted to go to south of France yesterday, and because it was so charming yesterday, I think it's still really charming today. Let's just check in again on it and see, is south of France actually charming today, or was that a yesterday thought? I had a yesterday thought, and then if I hang on to it and I get rigidly attached to specific timings and outcomes, then I'm not trusting in the overall larger picture. Nature may have satisfied whatever it was in some other way that would have been satisfied had I been able to hop a plane and go to France. And so then we need to regularly review and see what is present moment awareness charm. What is present moment awareness charm? And if nature continues saying south of France, south of France, south of France, but you can't see any way of going, don't give up on it. Keep your attention, de-excite, keep your senses spread out wide, and keep your attention on it. Maybe open up the encyclopedia and look into and read all about south of France. Maybe begin to gain a deeper understanding of south of France, but every day just check in and see, is it south of France today? And if south of France seems to be fading, don't try to kind of pump extra enthusiasm into it because 15 days ago it was really strong. Nature also evolves, and it can achieve things in ways other than you specifically having to go to a place. That window of opportunity opens and it may close again, and you might find the charm drops out of it, in which case attention on present moment, and you'll discover the next right thing to be doing, the next right thing. So take it as it comes. It's all fine. If you continuously wish to go to France and that continues being the thing, it means you're going. And so, continue preparing to go. Get everything ready. And, prepare yourself to go. The current situation, as we're calling it, will be eminently forgotten within what? This, in a decade, we'll all be looking back and going, remember that few months where there was a global lockdown and that thing that everybody got immune to. So this is going to be a tiny blip of time with given enough time perspective. Yeah.
Shifting perspectives again. Our next question comes from a meditator who says, I hear a lot of people talking about how the feminine is rising. Would you speak to what this means? Can you speak about it a little bit in relation to our current events and also what our role as meditators, especially female meditators, might be in terms of this feminine rising?
Feminine rising means, we have omnisexuality. We are globally sexual. Everything, every human, every bug, every bacterium, every virus, everything that exists, every rock has the totality of femininity and masculinity in it. In the human realm, there has been, in recent centuries, a willingness on the part of the feminine to play a secondary role. Some people will say, oh, Tom, what are you talking about? It was forced on us. But we can have this argument if you want. But actually, the potential for the femininity rising into balance has always been there. And now, with the age of enlightenment dawning, what we're seeing is, instead of femininity being and allowing itself to be the unheard aspect of life, it's now wanting to be more and more out in the world of complete involvement at every level of authority, of knowledge, of governance, and so on. And I, for one, can't wait for there to be more and more of the feminine in evidence in every area of life, because the legacy of the many years, the centuries, whereby we have the loss of the feminine, the legacy of that, if we want to call that the masculine, the legacy of that hasn't been so good. 160 million deaths last century, come on. Most of that wasn't planned by women, was it? So we have an opportunity now to allow that quality of femininity to grow, not just socially, but in every way, including within our own individuality. And don't be afraid of it. You can't be afraid of what you are. You have 200% of life, 100% masculine and 100% feminine embedded in your DNA. And what it is that you choose to identify with at any given epoch of life. And again, rigid attachment is the enemy here. Sometimes people will say to me, Mom, how do you identify these days? And my answer will be, well, this is a very good question. Don't judge yourself or others based on, feminine, masculine, and all that. Like, this is a permanent thing. I finally found what I really am, and it's this. That kind of rigidity is actually going to create more of the same problem. The Vedic worldview is that everything that exists, every atom, every living being, every form, every phenomenon is feminine and masculine both. And draw upon whatever you need to draw upon in order to gain greater balance. But it is a delight that we're beginning to see more and more the rise of that and all those qualities which we refer to as the feminine. Now, in other places, I have waxed lyrically on this subject, notably in a podcast that I did some time ago, which I believe may be entitled Omnisexuality. And, in that, I enumerate what are the widely accepted traits of feminine consciousness. We're not talking about genitalia. We're not talking about physiology. We know all about that stuff. We're not talking about sexuality. We're talking about consciousness traits that are the infinite organizing power, which is the very prominent trait of the feminine in everyone, including in men, and the tendency to zero in on analysis, linear thinking, and definition of boundary, which tends to be the more masculine way of consciousness behavior, both in women and in men. And so we can see that these two traits are there in everyone and in everything. And as we grow in our practice of meditation, we start to become global in our capacity to draw upon all of these qualities in our individual lives. And we're going to see more and more of this socially, appearing socially. We note it as a rise of the feminine, quotes unquotes, but actually what it is balance of masculinity and femininity in all things, not just in the human, in all things.
Do you have any guidance for parents who are very exhausted from quarantine childcare and not sleeping about what to do in a moment of feeling enraged by something a child has done? How can we channel peace in an instant to have the patience to find a good approach with our children?
Empathy. I have lots of children. Empathy. See if you can, and to what extent you can, feel from inside that child what it's like to be them. You're the adult. You're supposed to have greater adaptability, greater stability, greater knowledge. But as an adult, we'll very often have, our own little agenda, like, oh, we're wanting so much to watch this particular show on the telly, and I didn't get to watch it for the 15th time in a row. I had to because my child, or I wanted to do this, or I wanted to do that, and my agenda has been interrupted by my child. What other thing better than raising an enlightened child do you have to do? Do you actually have anything better to do than to raise an enlightened child? That's a rhetorical question. I'll give you the answer. No, you don't have anything better to do. So let go of rigid attachment to ideas of, I'll be so much better if the child stays asleep or does their online lessons or finds something to do, and I get to make myself a souffle according to the New York Times recipe. That's not a trade. Also, I want you to identify with your inner primal human being, the inner primal human being. It hasn't been so long that we human beings have had anything other to do besides hunting and gathering and moving from one fruit ripe area to another, following the game around, living wherever we lived under the open sky mostly. And what were we into? We were into raising the infants into knowledge, and most of that through example. We have to really handle the idea that we have to be preceptors. That means a preceptor is someone who teaches by precept, teaches by example. And so this is an opportunity now for us really to bring out everything that we've learned in our life so far, and also to enjoy the joy that comes from an innocent letting go and surrendering of preferences in aid of what? Having shared experience with a child. And so anytime we start to feel a little bit of rage, it's very important immediately just to quieten ourselves down and begin practicing techniques of empathy. To what extent can you use your consciousness to allow yourself to experience what it's like to be that child? What is it like to be that child? And what's it like to be that child in interaction with you? And so this is going to be the beginning of the solution of this thing. We really don't have a good excuse to be anything but as ideal as is possible for us to be in the presence of a growing child. And, you'll always find that whatever you might have had a preference to do or experience, it'll be nothing compared with the joys of you creating the memories that you want to have with that child. Create the memories that you want to have with that child. You'll forget the souffle. You'll forget the Netflix thing that you had tried 15 times to watch but got interrupted every time by a child's demands. You're going to forget about all that. What you won't forget is the experience of unity with that child. And so go for that. Go for the unity. That's my advice to you as a very experienced father. Very experienced.
Thanks, Thom. We received so many wonderful questions, and we want to let all of you guys know that I'm going to ask Thom one more question, and then as we did last time, we will record some follow-up questions with Thom afterwards, and we will both post those on YouTube and send them out in newsletters to come. And so if you did not hear your question get asked today, don't worry, your answers are coming. You just have to stay in that waiting state of consciousness a little while longer. But this will be our last question for today's group meditation. So Thom, a lot of our meditators in the community are wondering how we can retain the learnings of the lockdown once we return to, some sort of normality or return to daily life. What is your suggestion of how we can, retain what it is that we've learned here?
Pay attention. Pay attention to what you've learned. Pay more attention to what you've learned than you pay to the temptation just to go back to business as usual. Business as usual is never the right move when we've had an enforced interruption of our regular programming. We had in March the idea that somebody, heard that there were some infections over in China and probably that would all just go away. And, by the end of March, our entire world was turned upside down. An enforced interruption. And even governments that didn't want to participate in things like lockdowns and quarantining and all of that found themselves choiceless. This has been a wonderful global experiment. And by the way, I'm in no way losing empathy or sympathy with those who have lost loved ones. My deep condolences go to you. But for the vast, vast majority, it's been an experience of having to go to your room, like Mama says, go to your room and have some time out and close the door and think about things and don't come out until you've really given it some thought. If we attempt to go back to business as usual after this, there'll be another sending to the room of some kind. One could never predict where it would come from. What, some geologic event, some atmospheric event, some other germ that afflicts the whole of humanity, or global thermonuclear war, anything could happen. Business as usual will trigger the next level of magnitude of you have to learn the lesson. Don't learn the lesson, you come out of the room after some time out, and then you go back to your errant ways, and Mom will say, back to your room and longer this time. Or maybe we're just going to tear the room down, or maybe you're going to go out and live in a pup tent or something. So if we don't wish to have an even stronger magnitude, here's my motivation for you. If we don't wish to have an even stronger magnitude of learning, then we have to demonstrate what we've learned, how we've learned, and bring those lessons of the of the sequestering, bring the lessons of the isolation, the lessons of the hibernation, bring them into the world, and then demonstrate that we've learned something. And so what we need is motivation. I hope I've given it to you. Motivation is don't cause and create the ground for an even higher magnitude of attention getting from nature to human. And that alone should keep us on that more expansive approach of remembering what we've learned. That's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining me for this session, and stay alert to your emails. My team, Susan and Peter, are going to send you an email to remind you of the course that's coming up in less than a week. And I hope that as many of you as possible can be there, and we can just dive into this knowledge and absolutely love it. I will be doing that. Jai Guru Deva, all blessings to you and your families and all of those who surround you and who are concerned with your daily lives.